Hello, welcome to today's Afro Diasporic Dialogues. I'm Judith Puertas and I'll be your host. Before getting started, let me tell you something about this program. The Afro Diasporic Dialogues is organized by the Embassy of the United States in Colombia and the Centro Cultural Colombo Americano, Cali. Throughout 2021, the Centro Cultural Colombo Americano in Cali, with the support of the U.S. Embassy in Bogota, celebrates the achievements and contributions of African Americans and Afro-Colombians in the fields of arts, education, leadership, and entrepreneurship. The program encompasses art exhibitions, discussion panels, and talks with experts from Colombia and the United States. Today's special guest is Dr. Noelle Trent, Director of Interpretation, Collections, and Education of the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. Noelle Trent earned a master's in public history and a PhD in United States history from Howard University in Washington, D.C. Dr. Trent is an accomplished public historian and has worked with several noted organizations and projects, including the National Park Service, the Frederick Douglass National Historic Site, and the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of African American History and Culture, where she contributed to the exhibition Defending Freedom, Defining Freedom, the Era of Segregation, 1876-1968. Dr. Trent has been a contributor to the African American Intellectual History Society's blog and was featured in Breaking Free, an underground special for the WGA in America drama Underground. Dr. Trent has traveled internationally, presenting lectures at the European Solidarity Center in Gdańsk, Poland, and Sopot, Poland, as part of the 2017 Memphis in Poland Festival. Dr. Trent curated an exhibition and planned the commemorative service as part of the National Civil Rights Museum's commemoration of the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination, MLK 50. Dr. Trent, it is an honor having you with us. Thank you for accepting this invitation.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm pleased to be here.
Thank you so much. We're going to have this dialogue, all right? And we would like to start by you telling us about the Civil Rights Museum and your role at the museum.
So, the National Civil Rights Museum, as you mentioned, is located in Memphis, Tennessee. And we're actually in the historic Lorraine Motel, where Dr. King was assassinated on the balcony of room 306 on April 4th, 1968. Now, almost immediately after Dr. King's assassination, people around the world were grieving, and there were flowers sent, and there was a makeshift memorial created. And in the years afterwards, as downtown Memphis began to change and deteriorate, so did the motel. So, about in the early 1980s, the hotel went into bankruptcy, and a group of community members came together to save the motel with the idea that this place should be something important for the community and the world. And in 1991, we opened as the nation's first museum specifically dedicated to telling the African American civil rights story. So this September, we celebrate 30 years that we've been in existence. And since that time period, we have seen over 5 million visitors from across the United States as well as across the world. So that's just a little bit about who we are as an institution. When people visit, they get a full story of the history of African Americans in this country and the struggle for civil and human rights. So we start with the transatlantic slave trade and then move through Jim Crow and various aspects of the fight against segregation, from Brown versus the Board of Education to the Montgomery bus boycott, where Dr. King first got his start in the civil rights movement, through his assassination in 1968. Now, my role at the museum is Director of Interpretation, Collections, and Education. So it's quite a lot of different layers. I tell people that whatever you think of a museum as traditionally handling, that's what my team does. So we handle everything from our permanent and changing exhibitions to things like our collections, the acquisition of items telling the civil rights story, to education programs, and that goes from early childhood through adult. We're responsible for some of the key museum's events. So, King Day, which is our celebration of Dr. King's birthday, as well as the Ruby Bridges Reading Festival, where civil rights icon Ruby Bridges comes to the museum, and we give out over 10,000 books to area students, to our Student Forum, which is a component of our Freedom Award, which the museum has participated in since 1991, where we honor people for their contributions in civil and human rights.
Wow, very interesting, Dr. Trent. Thank you for sharing this information with us. So, why do you think it is important to have a civil rights museum?
Well, when we first started, there wasn't any museum to really honor this significant period in American history. And we thought it was important for people to know this story. I can't tell you the number of times people have come to me and said, I can't believe I wasn't taught this in school, or I didn't know this. It's also important because we know that the civil rights movement inspired other human rights movements across the world, that people drew their inspiration from the works of Dr. King and John Lewis and Reverend James Lawson, and Rosa Parks and many, many others. And so we want we needed to provide a context for that. It was also important for people to know the story, right? And that the story is more than just the notable people. What's important about the movement is that this is everyday people making some very conscious decisions about what they will and won't do, and moving forward and protesting and making small changes that have this reverberating impact. We have museums because they help us not only preserve aspects of our history, but they help tell that story, and that story exists beyond any one individual and community, and that's why we function the way we do.
Okay, awareness is key,
Yes.
definitely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And speaking of the work that you do at the museum, Dr. Trent, what do you like most about it?
That's a hard question to answer. I love so much of it. I think at the end of the day, I walk out of my office into my car knowing that the work that we've done has had an impact on society, whether it's a presentation or whether it's walking through the museum and seeing how our tour guides interact with our visitors. We know that we have created a change. And one of the things that I tell my staff is we don't know how this experience has impacted people. You're not going to always see someone crying or having immediate reaction when they walk out of the museum. Sometimes that thing lingers with them in the days, weeks, months, and even years afterwards. And then something happens and they remember their experience at the museum and how important and critical that was to them. And so I think that's where I draw my biggest strength from, is to know that every day we're putting out something that has a reverberating impact. And sometimes we're not fully aware of what that impact could be.
I understand. Thank you very much. And so that means that you keep yourself busy at the museum. It seems that you have lots of work to do there. Could you describe what a busy and exciting day is like at the museum?
Oh, that's really almost every day.
Okay, good.
But it could vary. Our days are, every day is different. And some days you walk in and at 9 o'clock in the morning we have a line outside the door of people who are ready and anxious to experience the museum. And so we can have family reunions, we can have school groups with students who are enthusiastic about learning and engaging with the museum. And it can be a very packed day On the days of our special events like King Day, which is our celebration of Dr. King's birthday, I get here probably between 5:30 and 6 a.m. In the morning. We have roughly about 800 volunteers that help us throughout the day, and we'll have close to 10 to 12,000 visitors in that day. During the day, we do free admission to the museum, and then we have an outdoor festival. So we have musical performances, people doing spoken word poems, and we also have a tent for children's activities and our community partners there to distribute information. We do a food drive on that day and a blood drive. So it's a real community day to not only celebrate Dr. King's birthday, but also do something to give back to the community because that's what he's about. And every single day is different. For instance, today we've got a press conference to announce our Freedom Awards. So staff is busy getting the room ready for that and ready to answer questions and get the media kits out to people. And what a lot of people don't realize is that the vast amount of information that's put out by the National Civil Rights Museum is done with a very small staff. We're probably just under 50 people on our staff, and that includes our frontline, retail staff, and our admin staff. And so everybody has multiple roles in this pandemic. Folks who traditionally don't work on the front line have come in and helped with our visitors. Our goal is to provide a quality visitor experience for everyone who comes to the museum, and we're dedicated to do that in every capacity. So when I say every day is busy and every day is different, I truly mean that. But our drive is to know that we are striving to serve as a catalyst for positive social change, and that people will then take this experience in our programs and our exhibitions to create change in their own communities.
So it's never boring, definitely. Good.
Absolutely.
Good, good. Speaking of the positive impact that the museum has had in society, how do you think the museum has impacted this education, and especially among African Americans in Memphis and in the United States in general?
I think the biggest thing about the museum is that we preserve the facade. So when you come, you can visit even when we're closed, right? And you can see the balcony of room 306. That balcony is a memorial, it is a pilgrimage point uh, for people. And we never lose sight of that and that significance, what that means to people. Unlike a lot of museums, we are a place where history happens. So there's an emotional encounter that happens with folks when they just get on our property before they even enter. And a lot of people think that they're just coming to see the room where Dr. King spent his final hours, but then what they encounter is an experience that provides them a larger context. I think what we have done as an institution over the last 30 years is to promote that story, but also to promote the story and stories of regular individuals, people who have just committed to creating a change in their communities. So, what that looks like is the parents of the students who integrated schools across the United States. That's not an easy choice. It looks like the women who boycotted buses. And the Montgomery bus boycott wasn't the only transportation boycott in the United States. It looks like the people who marched from Selma to Montgomery. And that was people of all economic backgrounds and racial backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds participating. I think what we do is we help people reconcile with this long struggle for human rights. We help put into context this larger story. And I think the other thing that we have done, especially in the last 10 years, is to link it to the international story. so that people can see that when you look at a struggle that happened in Yemen, the Jasmine Revolution in Yemen, or the Solidarity Movement in Poland, they are literally following the roadmap that was set out by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. That this thing didn't stay in a vacuum, that there was interaction, and in some cases, some of these activists traveled to other areas of the world, teaching them these tactics to create change. And so when people are looking at their own countries, they're finding that there were critical activists who were African American who came and helped people understand this is how you fight for your human rights. And so I think that's part of what we put out. And we're continually what we call ourselves the public square. So these issues have not gone away. This is still something that we're wrestling with locally, nationally, and internationally. And so we've become a place for that dialogue. We are constantly putting out information or hosting events and programs to continue the dialogue, to continue the conversation. And it looks different for different issues, but it's something that we're dedicated to doing.
Wow, and thank you for doing that. Definitely. And museums, and as you mentioned it earlier, is about the history behind us, things that are important to remember. But what about the future? Do you believe the museum has influenced the perspective of African Americans about their future?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think museums in general are at a reckoning point to figure out whether you are a cemetery for dead things or you're an inspirational point that connects the past to the future. In essence, you could think of a museum as a portal, right? That you enter, you see items from the past, you learn the stories from the past, but then you're also connected to the present and what the future possibilities could be. And I think that that's what museums really provide. And that's something that we do extraordinarily well. We are uniquely positioned where our mission statement mandates that we not only talk about the past, but that we also deal with the present, the contemporary issues, and look forward into what the world could be and what we aspire society to become. We're also part of a long history of African American museums in this country, serving as not only cultural touch points, but also serving as historical touch points. The first African American museum in the United States was founded at Hampton University, which is a historically black university. It was founded to educate formerly enslaved people and still exist today. Since its founding, there have been a number of museums, African American museums, that have come about. And we not only highlight our culture from our art, our performance arts, to our history, we also serve as a touch point for those issues happening in the greater society. So, us as the first museum dedicated to telling the civil rights story was one of the first museums to really focus in a very specific area of African American history that is really and truly American history and reverberates out to affect the global conversation as well.
Very interesting indeed. Thank you, Dr. Trent. And what about people with different ethnic and racial backgrounds other than African Americans? How do you think the museum has influenced the perspective of American history and the influence that African Americans have had on American history?
Well, the civil rights movement is everyone's story, right? We see people of various backgrounds participate in the movement. I think what's great about what we have done is that so many people see themselves in the stories that we tell. They identify with the struggles. It also inspires people to think about the change that they can create. We want people when they engage with the museum, not to just say, oh, that was so bad, that happened so long ago, but to draw inspiration from that. And through our supporters, our corporate sponsors, and even our community partners, we have seen that that has resonated with people of various backgrounds. We've partnered with a number of museums and other organizational groups over the years to have these discussions. And it can be everything from holding a rally here on the grounds regarding the treatment of Middle Eastern and Islamic uh, immigrants in the United States to a collaboration we did to protest the separation of families at the US Mexican border called I Am a Child. And we linked that protest, which was created by Paola Mendoza and photographer Keisha Bari, with the conversation around the humanity of African Americans in the sanitation strike. And it was a wonderful parallel, and it was a great conversation. And we actually brought together the Latino community here in Memphis, kids of Latino and African American backgrounds with Black men, and hosted a joint photo shoot and had that displayed at the museum to show that there is a joint conversation along our humanity. Human rights issues knows no bounds. There are certainly in this country issues of racial discrimination, and we will never lose sight of that. But the issues of poverty, healthcare disparities, educational disparities don't stop at a particular ethnicity. They go across the board, and we feel that there's a social responsibility that we have to promote those issues, bring those to the forefront, and have a dialogue and to educate our audience.
Thank you very much. Speaking of celebrations, Dr. Trent, the museum is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. Congratulations. What are the lessons learned and what are the plans for the future?
Oh, lessons learned. I think there were a lot of lessons learned with the museum. One of the biggest lessons I think for us was the importance of our community. And when I say our community, I just don't mean the local Memphis community, and they are tremendously important. People saved their pennies and donated proceeds from their businesses, held bake sales to get us started. And so it's incredibly important about that. But then the wider community, I am astounded at the support that we have from people who don't reside in Memphis or have visited once, and they continue to be supporters of the museum. When we had to close, and we had to close twice because of the pandemic, uh, it was really disconcerting. We didn't know how we were going to survive, and things looked really bleak. The estimate by the American Alliance of Museums was that one third of museums would not survive the pandemic, and we were very concerned. I mean, there's legitimate concern. We do well, but no one knew what would happen when we reopened our doors in July 2020. I was astounded at the number of people who showed up, people who came who just wanted to see the museum. I was astounded in the aftermath of George Floyd's death and the global protest. Um, the donations we received, and I'm not talking big money donations, I'm talking people who said, I saw what was happening and I care so much about the museum. I want to donate $50 to the museum to help it in its mission. Or I worked overtime because I'm a police officer. I want to donate a portion of my overtime check to the museum. I'm extremely humbled by that. You can't anticipate that. Uh, and I think it's interesting to see the international impact when people visit, and people tuning into our digital programming. We found out when we started to go virtual with our program, we had a whole audience of folks who were excited that they could tune in. I mean, people from Australia, Nigeria, I think we had viewers in Colombia, India. We had no idea that there was a whole audience of folks who care about this institution in that way. And we're so happy that our programming could now reach them in a meaningful way. So I think for us, that gives us a broader sense of our audience. and the impact that we have. I think what exists in the future for the museum is we're going to keep growing. We're going to keep working on reaching our audiences, being a part of these national conversations, and really truly stepping into the place of being a national and international leader. I think we've done that in a lot of respects, but I think you're going to see the museum step up in a major way. I had the opportunity to travel to Poland in 2017 and again in 2018. And I was really surprised at the response of the Polish community to the museum, to the story of Dr. King, to be connected to the story and wanting to learn more about the civil rights movement. And I'm hoping that, once this pandemic thing dies down, we can get back to that. I'd love to come to Colombia and bring the museum to Colombia. Like I think that there is new conversations and opportunities for us to have, and we're really looking forward to that.
Wow, just the thought of that gave me goosebumps, Dr. Trent. You're, you're coming to Colombia, to the Colombo Americano.
Oh,
We could do
I
great.
would love that. And there's such a great history of Afro Colombianos and their contributions. There's so many similar stories. I would love, I think it would be a great conversation for us to have and to be able to host an exhibition and to make some of our programming and assets available to the Colombian community would just be an honor. And there are so many great similarities between our countries that there's just wonderful conversations that could be had. So I'm crossing my fingers that we could make that happen.
Fingers and toes, so we
Right.
can make that happen soon. So thank you so much. And to end this conversation, Dr. Trent, what would you recommend to young people in Latin America who want to make a positive impact on their communities, the way that you are doing with your museum?
I think the first thing for young people or the youth in Latin America is number one, don't be dissuaded by adults who are saying, you're not doing it like we did it better, you guys don't care. One of the things that I tell people is this generation does really care, right? It doesn't look like how it looked when you did it, but to be perfectly honest, when we look at the civil rights movement, the young people of the civil rights movement, they were doing new and inventive things as well, right? So there's a way for them to step up. Um, don't I would also say be brave and be bold in stepping out there. I have seen young people do amazing things, and it just starts off as a small idea to, for instance, maybe provide food to a local community or read books to local children, and it grows into something much bigger. Don't be afraid to use the things that are your assets and your strengths. And for them, I think that's social media, but don't be just a social media activist. It's not just going and tweeting and posting on Instagram. It's using that as a tool to inspire change. But don't be intimidated by the forces that are against you. Great change has happened in societies when the young people have stepped up, when they have said something isn't right. So, look at what you have, and you don't have to march or hold rallies if that's not your thing. That's okay. If you want to learn how to be a legislator and be a politician, maybe you begin to shadow a politician and put out, work on a local bill or an ordinance to create that change. You can work behind the scenes. That's perfectly acceptable. Find the thing that's your inner driver. Everyone has something that makes them unique, that makes their contribution special, and be the best that you can at that. Dr. King has a speech where he says, if you're a street sweeper, be the best street
The
sweeper
best.
that you can be. You don't have to necessarily be this massive national leader. And I think sometimes we get caught up in the big leaders and we forget about the regular folk who just got together and did something, did it well, and created a positive impact. I'm very hopeful for the younger generation, both here in the United States and abroad. I think that they care a lot about human rights, their communities, the environment. You see that in so many different ways. And I say go out and do that, but also be persistent. Um, Greta Thunberg, we know her now as this international young icon against environmentalism, but her first few protests were just her and her friends. That's three people, right? You got to keep doing this work. You're going to have successes, you're going to have challenges, but if you keep working at it, if you keep growing and learning and keep moving that needle forward, you're going to create a great contribution to society. I believe in you, and I know that there are so many people around you who believe in you as well.
Thanks, Dr. Trent, for having this conversation with us. Very inspiring. Thanks very much to the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee, and the wonderful staff that's working along with you in this fantastic project. We also want to thank the U.S. Embassy in Colombia and the staff at Centro Cultural Colombo Americano, Cali, for making this encounter happen. All of you who are connected to this virtual event, thank you. And please stay tuned to our social media and websites to find out other exciting cultural programs as we slowly but surely return to our on-site services. Be patient, we're coming back. Explore our virtual events in our YouTube channel or on the video section of our Facebook page. And don't forget to like and share. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.